Hello, friends, family, lovers, enemies. Today we are going to talk about the power of the seven, as in the seven from A Song of Ice and Fire. A lot of people on the internet I've seen think the seven are just compared to all the other gods we see, they really don't seem that powerful. So a lot of people write the seven off because, it just seems like a criticism on the Catholic Church. But I think that the seven have a very significant role to play in the narrative and in Westeros in general. So let's talk about what is the point of the seven. The seven are the seven ruling archetypes of the Westerosi psyche, specifically, or more specifically, the southern Westerosi psyche, and in some northern lands. The seven are the maiden, the mother, the crone, the smith, the warrior, the father, and the stranger. Let me define what I think of archetypes or how they function. Try to think of archetypes as having a consciousness and will of its own outside of one human form. These archetypes are able to play out the drama of themselves through human form. And because these seven rule the Westerosi mind, the dramas we see unfolding in King's Landing and other southern locations are the gods living through humans. When people pray to a certain of the seven, it's usually because they represent that archetype in some way. I'm going to read a couple passages from Brienne 5 from A Feast for Crows to sort of highlight what I'm talking about. So this is when Podrick, Kyle Hunt, and Brienne are all traveling with Septon Maribald to, they're traveling through the coastlands because they're looking for the Hound. This is Septon Maribald speaking. "I've not worn a shoe in 20 years, he told Brienne. "The first year I had more blisters than I had toes, and my soles would bleed like pigs whenever I trod on hard stone. But I prayed, and the cobbler above turned my skin to leather." "There is no cobbler above," Podrick protested. And then he kind of goes on and talks about the seven, and he gets into the archetype of the smith. "No one could doubt the value of a smith, and so we name one of the seven in his honor. But we might as easily have called him the farmer or the fisherman, the carpenter or the cobbler. What he works at makes no matter. What matters is he works. The father rules, the warrior fights, the smith labors, and together they perform all that is rightful for a man. Just as the smith is one aspect of the Godhead, the cobbler is one aspect of the smith. It is he who heard my prayer and healed my feet." So, in addition to these archetypes having a kind of will of their own and desiring to play themselves out through man, man also shapes these archetypes. The seven are called the way they are because it helps shape society. It's useful to show the women of Westeros that the only roles available to them are the maiden, the mother, and the crone, because women in this country are needed to bear children and ensure legacies. it's useful for the father, the warrior, and the smith to shape a man's psyche, because these are the sort of idyllic roles that men should play. So the smith isn't called the cobbler or the farmer because while those roles are important, they aren't as gendered or warlike as the smith. Westeros relies on gender roles and war to function. These roles are what is needed to mold the minds of the masses. The same goes for the father and the mother. It's beneficial for the powers that be for people to aspire to become mothers and fathers in Westeros, because as far as the small folk go, it's there needs to be a labor force, and as far as the nobles go, you need people to idealize these concepts so that the bloodlines can continue, so that people's legacy can keep going. Here is another passage from Brienne 5 from A Feast for Crows, after they've been traveling for a time, and they start to meet some of Septim Maribald's people, the people that he preaches to. Near midday, the dog began to bark again, and 3 women emerged from the reeds to give Maribald a woven basket full of clams. He gave each of them an orange in return, though clams were as common as mud in this world, and oranges were rare and costly. One of the women was very old, one was heavy with child, and one was a girl as fresh and pretty as a flower in spring. When Maribald took them off to hear their sins, Sir Hyle chuckled and said, "It would seem the gods walk with us, at least the maiden, the mother, and the crone." Podrick looked so astonished that Brienne had to tell him no, they were only 3 marsh women. This is my favorite part of this chapter, and maybe even the book in general. So, even though Brienne doesn't believe, I think Sir Hyles pointed out something really fun for us to break down. Now, he said the gods walk among us, at least the maiden, the mother, and the crone. But in this scene, there are 7 characters. So we have the 3 women, and then we have Septim Maribald, Podrick Payne, Sir Hyle Hunt, and Brienne of Tarth. We already know that Septim Maribald is playing the role of the cobbler or the smith. And we also know that Podrick is playing the role of the warrior, because earlier in the chapter, Septim Maribald asks Podrick who his favorite god is, and Podrick responds with the warrior. That leaves the father and the stranger. For the time being, I think Sir Hyle has to be the father. There's less evidence of this, but I really don't think Brienne could be anyone else but the stranger. This is a theme in A Song of Ice and Fire. Most of our main characters play the role of the stranger. Most of them are outcasts in some way. Think about Jon Snow as a bastard. Tyrion is a little person. Daenerys is like an exiled queen. Brienne is a woman, but she wants to be a warrior. She wants to be a knight, and that's unacceptable in this society. She's also huge, and she doesn't look like a pretty little maiden should. Why this is important. The 7 are often described as 7 in 1. This is a concept that probably has some philosophical name, but it's really common. You can think of the Holy Trinity as 3 in 1. I mean, even just the goddess in paganism is the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And all of these archetypes play into the larger being. As humans, we embody these archetypes to some degree or another. And in a sense, every single person, every single being on this earth is an archetype or an aspect of the one God. That's why we don't really see the seven in the same way as we would R'hllor or the Drowned God in this series, because they're not about elemental power. They are about archetypal power and how to shape the mind of someone. Again, the reason the seven are the way they are in Westeros is because it helps shape the Westerosi psyche. It keeps a power structure in some sort of balance. But the major theme with the seven throughout the series is that it is actually very much imbalanced, because the stranger is the archetype that people ignore the most. Whenever we walk into a sept, typically it'll be remarked on that there are a lot of candles lit at the altar of the mother or the maiden, and there's usually only one candle lit at the altar of the stranger. Now, the stranger, again, as most of our main characters embody the stranger, there's also another big player that embodies the stranger, which is the others. The others and the stranger represent winter, the death that comes with winter, the frozenness that comes with winter. And in Westeros, and even in the north, these archetypes are not honored. In the south, people do not light candles to the stranger. In the north, if you go with certain theories, even though the north would actually be the kingdom to represent the stranger, because there are 7 kingdoms, sacrifices haven't really been made to the others in the same way as they always have been. Craster's someone who keeps up with this. He sacrifices to the others. There are northerners who do give blood sacrifice to their werewoods, but it seems like that's not really known by a lot of people. Maybe that has sort of fallen out of fashion because of, Southern influence. The others have been ignored to an extreme degree at this point. This is a world that, even though it's a fantasy world, a lot of people don't believe in fantastical things. They don't really believe in the children of the forest or giants. They joke about snarks and grumpkins, and in that way, this aspect of God is not honored. And because the others and the stranger represent death, death is not honored. This is kind of drastic because it creates a society that cannot handle grief or death, cannot face itself when confronted with that. I think this is why, in a sense, this world has seasons that are so slow, because symbolically people are frozen in their beliefs. They don't want to face the fact that death is coming. And when we don't want to face the fact that death is coming, it comes for us either way. And it comes in even more intensely when we don't want to look at it, which is literally what's happening in Westeros, because winter is coming and it's going to be a terribly long winter. I think the 7 is more of a tool to show us, the audience, the state of things in Westeros. But if I were to say how the 7 could be useful, I think that the stranger should be honored more. It's almost like if the people of Westeros can honor the other within, or even the other, like, that they see, like someone like Brienne of Tarth or Tyrion Lannister or Jon Snow, if they could respect that person despite them being a type of outcast, that could change something within. I mean, it would certainly prepare people better for the long winter that is coming, because they would be able to accept each other for who they are and be able to work together more easily. But because they've denied this aspect of themselves, they are not ready for when the stranger does come. And because the stranger is, even if you ignore it, an aspect of God, the stranger will always have its due. Death will always have its due. That's about all I got on that small passage. I love Feast for Crows for this really microcosmic type of storytelling, where it's really in the details what's going on in Westeros. When you look at the raw characters that you're given in each chapter, and you kind of search for those archetypes, you can kind of see how the whole story is playing out. And I love that about these books. There's so much rich, good, finished storytelling in these books. And there's so much to explore. Even that the whole series isn't finished, there's so much to go back and read and analyze and be really satisfied reading it. So, yeah, thanks for listening.